Isaac Amuku, who will give us a welcome remarks for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We welcome you all to this virtual conference on online gender-based violence. We are delighted to have you today for this important conference. My name is Isaac Amuku. I work with Women of Uganda Network. For joining us, and the fact that you've joined us, it shows how important this online gender-based violence conference today is important. As Women of Uganda Network, we are committed to ensuring a society where all women are empowered through the use of ICT. We have conducted several research on online gender-based violence. We have conducted research on women's rights issues that are in the online space. You can go on our social media platforms. You can go on our website to learn more about what Ugnet does. And through the support that Association for Progressive Communication, All Women Can't Take Back the Tech, we are privileged today to have this important conference that our guest speakers are going to share with us their different perspectives about online gender-based violence. We are delighted for you having joined us from wherever you are for this conference, and we are honored to have you. Prepare yourself to be challenged, prepare yourself to be inspired, prepare yourself to learn more about online gender-based violence. From me to you, I wish you a successful conference. Thank you so much, and I welcome you all. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Isaac, for the welcome remarks. We'll now go into our discussion. I'll be your moderator today. My name is Sandra Acheng, and I'm with Woognet. So we will have our first speaker, Tuasime Patricia. If I pronounce your name wrongly, please forgive me. Patricia is a feminist lawyer working with Kina Mama wa Africa as the women's economic lead. Patricia, you're welcome. Patricia, could you please share with us your experience on online gender-based violence and how is the feminist movement in Uganda tackling online gender-based violence in Uganda? And could you just give us also the research you did on the intimate partner violence, especially non-consensual intimate images? What were the key highlights from this research, and how do you think this research can help in the fight of online gender-based violence, especially in Uganda? Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sandra. Let me share my screen so that I can start sharing this presentation. Can everybody see it?
Yes, I can see it, Patricia. I do not know whether
yes, please.
I can see it.
Okay. So this is, I hope it will be able to answer all your questions. Now, the reality for many women who use the internet today is that they are constantly having to navigate just like different forms of violence. Now, non-consensual image distribution is just one of those forms of violence. There's trolling, there is abuse that oftentimes is synonymous with the kind of abuse that women experience on offline as well. So this presentation is specifically going to be speaking to non-consensual image distribution, although we will delve deeper into just all forms of violence against women that women experience. You may notice from the first slide is really just to put things in perspective, right? Because we're talking about non-consensual image distribution. We're talking about a double standard where women are shamed for things that men are not shamed for. So this is basically what this first image shows. Now, in 2015, Desire Luzinda was front page news, not for her popular music, but because her ex-boyfriend had circulated nude images of her. In her narration of events, her former lover publicly distributed the images she shared with him during the relationship to punish her. Desire's naked body was plastered on several social media sites and eventually local tabloids, all without her consent. In turn, the serving Minister of Ethics and Integrity ordered for her arrest for violating the Anti-Pornography Act. Desire was also forced to issue a public apology. In August 2019, Ugandan actress Betty Juko was coerced into apologizing to the nation for her naked pictures, which she played no part in sharing with the public. Judith Hard, Anita Charimpa, Claith Chathaire, and many more women have found themselves as tabloid gossip, their bodies a topic for discussion across the country. Where they would have then turned to the law to protect them, the law is prosecuting them. Now, non-consensual image distribution has become such a prevalent reality in our society today. Almost everywhere you turn, there are naked pictures of women on the internet, many of them shared without their consent. There's also materials of nude pictures, sex tapes, and really other materials of a sexual nature. At this point, I think it's important to emphasize that while most people refer to non-consensual image distribution as revenge porn, this is a highly inaccurate and actually offensive term. This is because to use the word revenge is to assume that the victims have committed an original harm for which the perpetrator is owed retribution. This just isn't the truth in all these cases. To understand non-consensual image distribution, it is important to locate it on a continuum of sexual violence. Our understanding of sexual violence has evolved from only physical violence such as rape and unwanted touches to include non-physical actions. These actions are intended to be just as harmful to the victims and take away their sexual autonomy. Sexual violence in the digital age further seeks to reinforce women's fear and promote social subordination and exclusion. Now, a huge factor in how all this plays out is the internet. The offline abuse women experience is oftentimes amplified online. There are websites that are dedicated specifically to revenge porn, where people are encouraged to post such intimate pictures. The goal is to always inflict humiliation and harm on former lovers and other people. The rise of online spaces that encourage that abuse, often without any real consequences, has left women even more vulnerable in this age of the internet. The harm created by the internet is further amplified by how difficult it is to have these images completely erased after they have been posted. The existence of this digital footprint means that even if the platforms and websites were taken down, these images remain forever downloaded and in the hands of many. There is thus an ever-present danger of recirculation and thus re-traumatization. Now, research done by looking at the popular revenge porn website, myex.com, indicated that over 10,000 posts were of women and only about 1,000 of men. Women are 1.7 times more likely to have their intimate pictures reshared without their consent. This is a 10-to-1 ratio. This further cements the argument that non-consensual image distribution is very much a gendered crime. So what exactly would motivate someone to share another's images? Some of the perpetrators have said these things that you can see on the screen. Underlying these motives is the desire to control, manipulate, and punish the victim. The perpetrators range from ex-lovers whose motivation is to get retaliation, to those who use the threat of or actual distribution as blackmail. For others, this just brings some sort of perverse satisfaction. And yet in Uganda, it is not the perpetrators who are punished, it is the victims. And the reason for this is the Anti-Pornography Act. Now, popularly dubbed the miniskirt bill, APA began a movement to legally criminalize women's nudity in Uganda. At the time this was happening, Uganda, and interestingly enough, American religious fundamentalists had joined forces in a bid to bring the country back to morality and to God. This is the actual language from the bill, like the words you see on the screen. Government officials who were interviewed about the law told journalists that miniskirts should be considered indecent and punishable by Ugandan law. They actually blamed women who wore them for causing accidents. I think that it is also important to note this has been interpreted as that a woman who dresses the way she dresses is dressing as such in a need to excite men. The absurdity of punishing women's nudity in Uganda is that nakedness has long been accepted as a cultural lifestyle in many parts of our society. However, the Anti-Pornography Act has been weaponized by the state, the perpetrators, to abuse, control, and violate women. As the Pornography Control Committee focuses on what can only be rightly termed as slut-shaming parades, the actual criminals often face no real consequences. Now, women in Uganda are being arrested because they are the subject of nudity, despite the fact that many have not consented to their images being shared publicly. The act is therefore a clear illustration of the ways in which the law is often weaponized to further harm women. This has also resulted into several ridiculous policies in private and public spaces dictating how women behave, dress, and that has adverse consequences on women's safety. So the reality of victims of non-consensual image distribution in Uganda is that they are being forced to apologize for the actions of their abusers and face further humiliation in front of the media and the entire country. The bias in the law is further evidenced by the existence of tabloids, which continue to market sexualization of women and their bodies without any real restriction. Clearly, where nakedness is controlled and centered for the male gaze, it is acceptable in our society. Now, at this point, I really hope that we can all agree that this is really outrageous. And so a multi-pronged strategy is required when so much of the problem is based in culture and religious norms. The solution is one, to revise policies and support social change that makes it easier for victims to seek justice. Now, feminists in Uganda have been organizing and writing and protesting in various ways, right? So what we need now is to ensure that the sexual harassment laws in place are actually able to speak both to the times, but ensure that the victim is not further victimized. The other thing is to ensure that sexual harassment laws criminalize actions such as sextortion, sexploitation, digital stalking, and other forms of abuse that happen online but are often trivialized. Uganda must also amend the Anti-Pornography Act to shift its focus on protecting victims of non-consensual image distribution. Now, another key step in shifting the culture is the media. It can use its influence for good and not for evil by changing the way it reports on non-consensual image distribution. And finally, we have to think about our own role in ending the cycle of violence. A good place to start is to stop resharing, looking at, and gossiping around such images. It looks like there's still a lot of work to do, and there really is, but I'm very confident that this is a battle that is worth the fight. Now, I expound on this, including discussing the role of external and internal forces and pushing this ultra-conservative version of morality, the different feminist alternatives in a paper that will be published early next year by the Georgetown Journal of Gender and Sexuality. But I do hope, Sandra, that I have answered those two questions.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing very wonderful discussion around intimate partner violence. What I really pick from our submission is the unfavorable policy area that Uganda has, and also how the internet create harm, especially for the women who are vulnerable and marginalized groups in Uganda. So before we could move further, I would like to give opportunity to 2 or 3 participants who could be having questions to raise their hands or unmute and ask questions for Patricia before we could go for to the next speaker. Thank you. Any question? Feel free to unmute and ask Patricia. Ladies and gentlemen.
I don't know if no questions is a good thing or a bad thing.
Okay, so I will take silence for a no. We could go next to our next speaker, who is Dr. Bridget Harris, who will be sharing some of the key highlights of our studies from Australia. You're welcome, Dr. Harris. We are so privileged to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I was so into the presentation, I realized I didn't get my slides ready. But I can start talking. But I thought that was amazing, Patricia. I loved how you framed violence and also your suggestions about what we need to do moving forward. I'm just here online and reports that people have written. And it's just so great to be here. So we have so many different forms of gender-based violence that I think everybody will be familiar with. And the first, I think, would be that form of by the unknown person, or they might be known, but we don't know their identity. So we have that kind of anonymity element. Then we have those forms of violence where, oh, thank you so much for my slides. Oh, thank you. That's excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much. And then we have the people who might be known, and platforms often recommend them to us. So they might be friends of friends or associates. And that's really hard because we know that sexual violence is often committed by people in your social network. And so it might be a way that, unfortunately, social media recommends that we come into contact with someone who's harmed us. And then we have violence on the dating apps and sites where there might be someone that you know a little bit, but not properly. And then we have the intimate partner violence, is what I'm really going to talk about today. So technology has really changed how people experience, so we call it often domestic violence in Australia, but intimate partner violence. And it provides a few different channels for abuse. It's really different though, because it is spaceless. And if we think about how you use technology, you can send messages immediately and instantly in high volumes, and it allows you to track what somebody is potentially doing. And so it is very different. And that means that when you leave a violent relationship, you can still be exposed to violence anytime you're accessing a phone or computer or social media. It really changes how people experience violence in relationships, how they feel they might protect themselves afterwards. And that means that it stops a lot of people from leaving violent relationships, especially if they know that they're being tracked or stalked by their partner. So there are huge impacts on people's well-being, safety, and also their sense of security. Can I have the next one, please? The next slide. Thank you. So this is this circle is a really great snapshot that some advocates in Australia formed about the kinds of ways that perpetrators might use technology in intimate partner violence, but it occurs alongside other forms of violence. So it doesn't just happen on its own. People might experience physical violence or sexual violence, emotional, psychological, financial, and technology is just one broader component here. It's just another channel that perpetrators use. The next one, please. Thank you. So one of the things that I think is difficult is trying to define what we're talking about when we say technology and domestic violence or technology and intimate partner violence. And it constantly changes. So the ways that people use technology, the behaviours of perpetrators change, and technology changes. So it's going to be something that is continually evolving. So I have a definition for us, but what I would say is we need to think about how technology changes and how perpetrators change as well. The next one, please. It's really useful to have a definition though, because it means what we can do is we can develop prevention initiatives, we can develop education initiatives, and we can look at what we need to do maybe in the justice system and the community here too. So these are the sort of harms that we see. The first is using technology to enact other forms of abuse. And so that might be using technology to engage in financial abuse and also traditional stalking. So that in-person stalking, technology can help there. We also see, sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. Oh, I might come back to that at the end if that's okay, the different forms of violence. No, sorry, I still have that slide, that last one. We're just looking at the questions. Oh, a couple, sorry, the other way. Sorry, I can keep going. So that stalking, it can also be just used to send abusive acts or communication. So we often see perpetrators sending a lot of text messages. It can be used to cause an unauthorised function on a device or impair an authorised function on a device. So for instance, they might stop you making phone calls. There might be an app that stops you contacting people, or they might make your phone work a bit differently, or they might make your phone activate when you're not turning it on yourself. That doxing, that release of personal identifying information, impersonating somebody else using technology. So I've seen that happen, for instance, when people have impersonated a police officer or impersonated a friend of their child using technology. And also stalking, so using technology to monitor somebody's activities, movements, or communications. The next one, please. So that is a really big list, but the problem we have is that perpetrators don't just use those kind of strategies. They really target particular people in particular ways. And so what we have to do is look not just at individual acts, but what is happening in the broader relationship. So what are the patterns that perpetrators are engaging in? What are all of the acts that they are performing? And so that means that we really think about the context of relationship, we think about the intent and the impact. And what we do is really look at the intent being to coerce or control someone, and that impact is being to have been controlled. So if we can look at the next one. So that sounds a bit strange, but I'll give you a couple of examples to show what I mean. Some of the behaviours that we see in abusive relationships, we also see in non-abusive relationships. So you might, for instance, have a relationship with your partner where you have an app where you can see where the other person is. And so you can kind of monitor each other that way, but you might feel comfortable, and that might be okay. It might, for instance, help you know when someone's coming home. If you're preparing dinner, it might make you less worried about somebody if they're going for a jog somewhere. You can find out where they've gone. And then we also have things like FaceTime or video calls. And so that's a really great way to connect with somebody. And I mean, we're using Zoom now to have these kind of functions. So it's really positive. But what we've seen happen is perpetrators use technology to stalk, so to monitor somebody. So that idea about tracking your partner has kind of a negative element. And then we've seen perpetrators use that video call function to try and get information about where somebody has essentially escaped to. So they might encourage kids to turn on a video function so they can see where the safe house is or where they're residing now. So the same behaviours, but it becomes dangerous and has negative impacts in an abusive relationship. And so that means that we can't just have one list where we kind of look out for these behaviours, because we have to think, what else is happening in the relationship? So what are these patterns of behaviour? We think about what are the intentions of that person and what is the impact of those acts. And so that's why we need to really think more broadly about ways that technology might be okay in some relationships, but not in others. Yeah, the next one, please. So we used to see perpetrators using either what we would say is low tech or high tech. And the low tech is just the everyday things. And so it might be, you know, sending text messages. So that doesn't require like a really high level of skill. You can learn how to text pretty easily. On the other end, you might have really complicated technologies or processes, and that's the more high tech element. So it used to be we had low and high tech, but the technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper. And there are lots of ways that you can just Google to learn about technology. And so that means that it's not so easy to say, oh, these are the only strategies someone's using. And that can be really challenging if we're trying to help make somebody safe, because we don't necessarily know what strategies perpetrators are using. So it means we need to be a little bit savvy in thinking about the low and the high tech elements. The next one, please. Perfect. So we do really need to think about different vulnerabilities and different risks for people. And one of the things that I do in my work is look at what happens when this violence occurs in different places. So what happens if it occurs in the city, and what happens if it occurs in, say, a rural area. And there's a few things that make it riskier to be in a rural area. So you're further away from, you know, friends, family often, and say different medical services and supports. The internet might be patchier in a rural area. So there can be a few things that mean you're at greater risk in rural areas. And that means that we do need to really think about what happens if someone's experiencing violence in a non-urban as compared to an urban place. So that's one of the big things that I do at the moment. The next one, please. What we see happening is there's a kind of myth often that when people leave a violent relationship, the violence will stop. But often what happens is the violence can continue or increase. And that's what we see happening with the tech element. In the work that I've done, it either begins when people separate or it escalates. And so that means that separation is a really dangerous time. And that's, as advocates, when it's really important to help somebody managing their tech safety, managing their safety offline as well, because it's a really dangerous time. The next one, please. So some of the different trends that we are seeing, and these are some of the things too, I'm going to talk a bit about it, the comparison between Australia and Uganda, but one of the things that we're seeing happen in both places is perpetrators controlling technology and destroying devices. And if somebody is an intimate partner, then they have a lot of information that, say, a stranger just on the internet doesn't have. And so that can mean that it's also quite easy to gain access to your accounts because they might know the little questions that will help get access to your password or reset your account. So we have to think about security, cybersecurity a little bit differently. We know that more and more people are using technologies. Technology is cheaper. One of the other things that we see happen is different networks might engage in tech violence too. So this might be somebody in your friend group in the real world, or it might be your friend group online, so you've never met before, but you might engage in harms. And Patricia was talking a lot about, in Australia, we refer to it as image-based sexual abuse, but that non-consensual sharing of images. And what we see is sharing happening between real-world friends and also online friends as well. So people they've never met before engaging in perpetration. The next one, please. So one of the things that tech violence can show us is if somebody is at risk of a homicide, or so that fatal violence, and that's because it shows some of the flags. And so some of the flags that somebody might be advancing towards a homicide is that really obsessive behaviour, so high volume of text messages or emails or phone calls, death threats as well. So they might be threats to, say, a woman, it might be threats to their partner or threats to their family, or also threats to the perpetrator to self-harm. Monitoring and stalking is another big homicide flag, and we can see that happening through technology. So it can be a way that we can see that somebody is at risk, really. What often happens is survivors are pressured to just stop using technology. And that's really problematic when you think about how much we use technology for everything. It also puts a lot of the burden on survivors, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're safer. So I'll talk about that later on. The next one, please. So there can be that fatal violence and that risk, but there are lots more impacts. And that's the first one would be technology becoming a weapon. And so if you think about using technology to connect with friends and family, for just fun things, for leisure, for entertainment, for work, for education, if technology doesn't feel friendly, you can lose a lot of things in your life that you really enjoy and need. Also paying bills online, those sorts of things. But survivors have also talked about other impacts, so huge impacts on their health, well-being, their sense of security, and mental health is a big thing they talk about. Also, there can be huge impacts on someone's physical health because of all of these effects. And it can mean that you feel less comfortable exiting a violent relationship. You feel that it's kind of constantly there because someone can access you through technology at any time. And the next one, please. So what happens, and I know this has been a big part of the Twitter conversations that have been going on online, is all of the work that advocates and support workers and survivors as well have to do to try and manage their safety. And that means that they have to be really, really focused on their technology, their children's technology. It means that they have to think about what knowledge the perpetrator might have from the relationship. So, okay, well, what passwords might they be able to guess? It means that they're often told to stop using technology. And so I mentioned that that's problematic because of how we use technology, but also because of the risk. And so what we've seen happen is when perpetrators are really obsessing about somebody, and when they are stalking somebody, if you remember, those are some of those homicide flags, they're really focused on a person. So if you just cut down one channel, unfortunately, they don't often stop, but they might start, say, stalking in person. They might start to turn up at work, for instance, and we see physical violence sometimes increasing. So it doesn't really make you safer necessarily. So it can be really dangerous just telling somebody to stop using technology, which makes it really tricky when we're trying to help someone safely use technology. It's also really important that if people want to keep using technology, we make sure they can, because it means that they can call their informal networks, so their friends and their family, and also formal like emergency services as well. So ideally what we do is help someone use technology if they still want to, and make it really safe for them to use. The next one, please. So advocates are doing amazing things, and I mean, people who are here today, I've been seeing the work that you're doing, which is incredible. And so some of the things advocates are doing is helping people use technology safely without stopping. It means telling people about potential risks. It means providing information on how to lock down devices. One thing that's pretty amazing that I've seen people doing is helping survivors make like fake digital footprints. And so they might post on someone's Facebook pretending that they're in one place when they're in another. So you can use technology to kind of trick someone sometimes, or create different content online. So if someone has, say, those images that Patricia was talking about online, it means trying to make a different sort of search result so that doesn't come up immediately, or making platforms take them down. We've got a few laws in Australia kind of around that. Advocates also use tech to provide information, to get people new devices, and really to provide information at a few different levels, information about violence, information about tech violence, and engage with tech companies. So having conversations with Facebook or Twitter, for instance. If I can have the next one, the things I was going to finish up talking about were just some of the things that survivors were doing. So they use tech to get information, for support, and find out how they can respond to violence. So what laws might exist that can help me, for instance, to find out what they need to do to safely use tech. And then also to challenge some of the stories about tech violence or victim blaming. And I mean, Patricia mentioned some of these elements. So they use technology to sort of challenge that and to campaign for change so that something else happens. The next one, please. I've just got a couple of examples to finish up with. So we had, there were some really, really bad media articles about violence that happened in Australia. And we had a Twitter hashtag that just went viral about helping people explain why it's hard to leave violent relationships. Then you also have things like this by Felipe, that's kind of an Instagram page where people post harassment they've received online, and it's a way that people kind of try and challenge the meaning, and they make jokes about the horrible things that have happened. And so it's just a way of kind of changing a meaning of the violence. I think I might have one more slide, possibly. Oh yeah, so sorry, I've got one after this, so we can move on. I'll remember this one. So one thing that we have is, like in rural areas in Australia, the justice system doesn't have as many resources, and so we start to use technology, or hopefully we use technology a little bit more, so that survivors can access police or the courts or a lawyer. Lawyers are doing really amazing things. And I've just got one more slide, I think. Yeah, so the last thing that Sandra had asked me to just talk about was the justice system. So there has been some progress, but unfortunately what often happens is police especially, might see tech violence as not as serious or not as harmful as other forms of violence, but it has huge impacts on people's lives. So that's really problematic. They sometimes see it as different from other forms of violence or harm. So they might see it as different from, say, physical violence, and so they don't look at the complete picture that happens. They might dismiss reports of tech violence, and that also happens around breaches of what we refer to as protection orders or intervention orders. They often give really confusing or conflicting advice. I mean, the legal system, I think, can have really confusing language. And so people don't always know, well, what do I need to do and what evidence is going to count? And that means that they don't also sometimes recognise the threats that are made. Just some of the things that I really noticed that are, I think, similar between what's happening in Uganda and Australia is we are seeing a lot of tech used to sexually harass and to stalk. And so there's been some really great work done in Uganda around monitoring by intimate partners and controlling that access to technology. Manipulating personal information is something that we see happening in both places, and that doxing. And a lot of the, as Patricia was talking about, the image-based sexual abuse or the non-consensual distribution is something else that we definitely see. But the other fabulous thing is how advocates, including the people here today, use technology to really challenge violence and also to assist survivors. So I think that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bridget, for your elaborate presentation on how tech is being used by perpetrators of domestic or intimate partner violence in Australia. What I really picked from our discussion is sharing the threats technology can bring, like freedom of expression, the right to engagement and opportunity. And she really brought in the aspect of what is being done to mitigate online gender-based violence in Australia, and how survivors use tech for many things like information. Thank you so much for that. I would like to open the floor for participants to ask questions, but maybe we have some questions in the chat from Sandra Nabu. Sandra, she's asking, I think this question goes to Patricia. She's asking, the law not working for women, could it be because women don't know the laws? Patricia, could you please answer that? Thank you.
No, the law doesn't work for women, not because women don't know the law. The law doesn't work for women because it was designed specifically for that. Now, when you look at, for example, the Anti-Pornography Act, and the stages it went through before it was passed, right? When you look at how the Pornography Control Committee chooses to act, it's deliberate. And in my paper, which I mentioned, I elaborate more on this, but the Anti-Pornography Act and subsequent laws that are meant to police and harass women are deliberate, because that's the nature of systemic oppression, which is really what why some of these things manifest the way they do, is because the systems are designed to control, to manipulate, to make it harder to navigate, right? And so these manifest through laws, they manifest through policies, they manifest through cultural norms and religious norms and ideals. And this is just one aspect of like the bigger systemic issue that we must continuously fight.
Thank you so much, Patricia. The next question, I think Bridget has answered in the chat. The question was by Yvonne. She was asking the difference between physical abuse and emotional abuse. Yeah, so I think Dr. Bridget has addressed that. I would also like to encourage if anyone has a question and would like to use the mic to ask, please feel free to take the mic and ask questions for our panelists before we can go to the next speaker. Thank you.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi.
So this is Jackie from Siha Network. I would like to appreciate first the conference and everyone who presented. It was great. However, I don't have any question, but I have just some things to talk about on the online violence, intimate partner violence, especially around uh, women in the informal sector and women and poor urban women. We find that not as we think that most of these women have phones, not all of them have phones. So last month, or I think some months ago, we engaged with some women around Kampala, and we found out that these women do not even have access to phones. That's one challenge. And then the ones who have phones, the men themselves control the phones. What do you do on the phone? And if a woman knows that my man, my husband, my spouse is on WhatsApp, the things that he puts on his status or his profile pic alone is how do I say it? The women don't feel good because they put things that the men put things that instead affect the woman. For example, putting the pictures of other women or putting what they discussed or their arguments, they send them on WhatsApp, or they go and send out what these women are going through in the households, the different challenges they face in the household as partners. They take them to other Facebook pages, and when this woman comes across it, you find that she's emotionally drained because she doesn't know even how to report this case or come how to react to it, because when she sees that the woman is posting the ignorance of how to to read and write, they don't know, and how to operate their online systems to get to these resources. Yeah, I think that's it. So I think ignorance of the law works for the women that I particularly work with, because they don't know even about the anti-pornography law. I think I'll try that. I'll ask them after this. I'll ask like 5 women if they've ever heard about this law or anything around women being protected by the law on online internet usage. Thank you.
Let me just respond. I mean, it's true that women don't know the law, but neither do men. And so for me, the ignorance of the law would not necessarily continuously perpetuate this harm in itself, right? The reason why the Anti-Pornography Act, even when people don't know about it, the reason why it was designed was very specific, which is why I say, if you look at like the origins of how that bill and then act eventually were passed, you realize that it was a very deliberate and systemic issue, right? So yes, it's true that people don't know the law. Most people don't know the law, right? But people not knowing the law does not immediately translate into the law being harmful. If the law is harmful from the start, it doesn't matter how much knowledge you know, because even the women who know the law and who are aware of their rights and quote unquote empowered in the most radical ways you'd imagine, are still subject to these very harmful values and traditions that manifest through laws, among other things. The first issue is also an issue on power and control, right? It becomes very difficult for women who constantly have to navigate just like being subdued by their husbands, for them to begin to imagine a scenario where even this, they consider such abuse actual abuse, right? Because it has been so normalized and they have been so conditioned to accept this as the norm that it's difficult to imagine anything else. So where you have women who can't go through their phones without someone looking over their shoulder, or who have to rely on someone like airtime and data, like, so creating solutions around that is challenging, right? Because of just how their environment is. So for me, I would say it has to be a multi-pronged approach. One of the biggest limitations to women's full emancipation remains like norms and cultural, religious, and etc. norms that continuously put women in this very little box. And so that's why like our advocacy plans and strategies have to be about like actually dismantling those power structures, right? How do you radically shake up the space so that those structures that are continuously holding women down, because without dismantling the structures, what you're doing is that it's more of how can I say it just becomes difficult, because you give the woman a phone and you imagine that you are like solving that problem, but instead you're creating another problem, right? Because then she still needs to ask for permission, and then she still needs money for data and etc. So I would say that our advocacy has to continuously be thinking through, how do we dismantle the actual power structures? How do we shift power? How do we make it possible for women to not just constantly have to request and beg and navigate all these like huge structures?
Yes, thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing and answering the question. Maybe just to highlight on the response of Bridget Aris to Yvonne. She highlighted the difference between psychological abuse and emotional abuse. Psychological abuse is more about distorting someone's reality. In brackets, she said we call it gaslighting in Australia. So making someone think that something happened or is true but is not, or has not happened. And then emotional abuse is about, it's more about bullying or understanding someone's self-esteem. So that is briefly it. And then we can go to the next question from Martin Musime. Martin is asking, on stalking, how do you distinguish a stalker from an authentic, I don't know how to pronounce the word well, of yours. So I do not know if who the question goes to. Could someone, Martin, could you please unmute your mic and ask the question? Thank you.
Mike, I'm wondering, following Harris's presentation and also Twasima, how to distinguish between a stalker and an enthusiast. Yeah, people at times have people who generally like them as people because of the content they share, because of perhaps their personality, etc., and they follow them to the dirt, yeah, to the detail, and that could border stalking. So to the experts, what is that distinguishing factor, yeah, between those thin lines of stalking and someone being an enthusiast of yours who just follows you and just likes, what you do? And I know it can at times get uncomfortable for an enthusiastic person, Yeah, that's it.
Okay. I think for me, the difference is in consent, right? I mean, I think that when someone tells you that they are uncomfortable and you continuously persist, that stops being flattering and it becomes more scary, right? And so I think that's always a difference. When you look at, for example, the cyber stalking case with Honorable Rabogo and what happened, and just like a lot of media houses trivialized it and say that those were love messages, but persistently pursuing somebody to a point where they begin to feel threatened, even when they say stop it, I'm uncomfortable with this, and you continue, that's no longer being enthusiastic, that's harassing, that's stalking. So I think for me it's just, that's just I don't even think it's so much of a thin line, to be honest, because if someone says, hey, I like your work, and you say thank you, and they say it again, and they begin to, and you say stop it, and they continue, they are harassing you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for sharing your perspective on that. I would like to request Dr. Bridget, would you like to comment on the question? I think Dr. Bridget's mic is muted.
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I put something in the chat, I think, about unwanted and constant. And I think Patricia said it exactly better than I did in the chat. It is that ongoing and unwanted attention. And so I think those two elements matter as well. It's the intent, so what somebody's intending to do in terms of that monitoring of you constantly, that unwanted attention, and also the effect, so how you feel in that circumstance. So those two elements together are definitely constant, ongoing. So patterns of behaviour are important to look at as well as that.
Thank you so much, Iris. I can see there are more questions, more comments on the chat. I see from Titi, who says that the technologies in delivering justice for vulnerable women and girls is extremely empowering. For example, testifying process testifying process at times with little disregard to the, in bracket, do not harm principles. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then I'm also seeing from Martin, she's saying some people tend to overly follow people they greatly admire. In fact, those they revive. So, and then I'm seeing from Dr. Bridget again, she's saying, I guess my feeling is unwanted and ongoing attention, restocking and monitoring activities, movements, communication. And then I think she was also trying to respond to Jackie. Jackie, she was saying my internet was cutting out, so I'm not sure I had the first question properly, but in terms of it, people are help seeking and wanting to do it without their partner seeing it. If possible, one thing we recommend is trying to set up code words with friends, family members, support workers, so perpetrators won't know what the word means. But it gets, if it gets a message out, there are some hidden hubs that can help to. I would like to ask Dr. Aris, would you like to take the mic and maybe elaborate more on what you are trying to say?
Sure. So one of the things that we did as well when there was lockdown, so people couldn't leave their houses and it was much harder to get help, was set up a few secret sort of hand signals as well as words that people could use. And so they could use them if they felt they were in immediate danger, for instance. And it's something that the perpetrator wouldn't realise that they were asking for help. And they often would let people use technology a little bit to contact friends and family. So it was a way that we kept those channels open, and they could ask for help without the perpetrator knowing. So if it's safe to do that, that can be really useful. There's a few different apps as well if people do have access to a phone, and that's hard too when if they don't have access to a phone or perpetrators are controlling the phone. But there are some apps that you can use, for instance, that will send a message to a number of people that you're kind of in trouble, or will send a certain message out, so you can set up a few different messages. So I'm happy to, if anyone wants to email me afterwards, I can send on some of the apps that are out there. One thing just to be careful of is the apps that are really good are developed by advocates themselves. Some of the ones that are set up by private companies just to make money don't work as well, and they don't really know what they should be doing. So always have a look at what advocates are setting up their safest apps to use.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bridget Harris, for sharing that. I can see more concerns or comments from the chat from Gole Andrew, who is saying that all these laws like the anti-pornography law or the bill seeking to make a miniskirt illegal that infringe on women's freedom to express themselves in the society, shouldn't we blame this on our cultural norms and how society expects women to dress or behave in public instead of fighting these laws? Should we find a way to change the cultural mind? I think this question goes to Patricia, and then we will have one more question and then we can go on to the next speaker. Patricia, could you please take the mic?
Right. So you see, culture norms, it's true, culture norms and religious norms and all this. Sorry, I realized I was muted. Yes, I was saying it's true that religion and culture and all these other ultra conservative norms are the biggest issue, right? Because laws don't just exist in a vacuum. They exist as sort of a mirror to what society believes is important. but you mean like fighting religious, how do you fight culture? I mean, it's such an abstract and difficult idea, right? But we try nonetheless, which is why feminists have constantly been pushing, in Uganda specifically, constantly been pushing for spaces for people to unlearn and to relearn. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, many of these people and who head these institutions are not interested, because shifting that cultural norm means shifting the status quo. It means shifting power structures, right? So when you think, for example, about the serving Minister of Ethics and Integrity, who is a former Catholic priest. And so the ideals that he comes into his job with is this very limited idea of women's place and what morality looks like and etc. Now, I really hope that you read my paper when it comes out early next year, because I also discuss just like the adulteration of our culture. Because in fact, a lot of the things that we consider our culture today, if we're to be honest, are not. These were imposed on us. And so I think that it's important for us, the only thing that we can do at this point is to continuously push for people to know better and therefore hopefully do better. But I think we cannot just leave the law alone. We cannot just leave all the other institutions alone. We must work with religious and culture institutions while also working with the judicial processes, while also, it's just like a multi-pronged approach. That's the only way that you can effectively work to shift an entire system.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I think you again have a question. David is saying, Sandra, I have a question for Council Patricia. David, could you please take the mic and ask Patricia again?
Yes, thank you so much, Patricia, and everyone who has presented. Thank you, Sandra, for hosting this. My question to Patricia is, does she think, or do you think that it is important for Uganda to have specialized courts to handle, cases of gender-based violence? And because just the same way how we have, for example, the anti-corruption court that deals with corruption cases, I think it would be a good step towards, expediting the manner and the speed at which cases about gender-based violence are, had and solved. I do not know what you think about that, but do you think it would be important to have such courts and also to have judges that are, specifically trained to handle such matters? Because you realize most of the judges that we have at the moment are, let me say, conservative, the ones that go by the book and the pen and have not necessarily been trained in so many matters of, cyber rights or internet rights, things of the sort. Yeah, thank you so much.
I remember once when I was victim was unable to say the word sex. This was an older woman of other of understanding what the issue was. I think that's what's lacking. I don't necessarily, it's true that most judges are unaware of like the current cyber trends and etc., but that would not be a problem in itself if they understood issues of violence, if they understood gender and how the gender dynamics manifest. Now, the problem with specialized courts is that you're likely to have a situation, without necessarily doing the right trainings, that you're likely to have a situation where that like now manifests with the family desk at police, right? Because it's not true that ever since we had that specialized desk at police, that sexual violence numbers have gone down, victims are more comfortable reporting to police, or that police is any more conscious of like the issues, right? Instead, what happens is that you also now just have a whole new problem that's created, because now you have this one desk that's supposed to do this, and if it doesn't do it, then nothing moves. So I think for me, what would be important at this point is to ensure that the judicial officers in all their ranks have a real understanding of what the problem is and how to solve it. I also think that we have to move away, we have to think beyond carceral systems of governance, right? Because what we're trying to do is ensure that the cycle of violence ends. It's important when it has happened to prevent it and ensure it doesn't happen again. But how are we working backwards to ensure that we don't have repetitive patterns of violence, right? And so one of those ways has to be with us as people, outside the police, outside the judges. How are we doing the work to ensure that we are addressing the root causes of these problems? I think that's really lacking. And I think that our advocacy has to continuously be targeted towards ensuring that we are not replicating harm in our societies, and that we are managing the situations that happen so that the victims feel safe and protected. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Patricia, for your very insightful response to David's question. I encourage the participants to keep sending their questions. You can use the mic or you can use the chat. And in case you would want to ask a question using the mic, feel free to also ask, and I will let you ask. Right now, we are going to the next speaker, who is Jimmy Aguma. Jimmy is the Chief Security Officer at Uganda Communication Commission. Jimmy, you're welcome to this session. I would like to just ask you to kindly share your experience on online gender-based violence as a cybersecurity expert. And we would also want to know what role is the police playing or has played to ensure that the mitigation of online violence is happening, and what are some of the policy recommendations you would like to give to civil society organizations and also internet users generally? Thank you. You can take the mic, please.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I hope you can be able to hear me clearly. I'm Jimmy Haguma. I don't have a presentation directly for you. I just wanted to speak to you specifically. I want to thank those who have just been presenting, Patricia, Dr. Harris. I just wanted to also find out from an inquisitive, Patricia, are you Tusima Birigwa, or Patricia is another name, just for the discussion?
Twasima Patricia Bijirwa is my name.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I asked that question, just dive into what I'm going to speak about. Many times when we are online, if you have looked, there's a research that was done by Facebook, and in 2019, they were able to pull down about 3.2 million fake accounts. And in 2017, it was about 2.5 million fake accounts. And so sometimes our identity online necessarily is not our true identity. And so this is where I wanted to start from. And thank you, Council. I think you have confirmed. I was just being inquisitive, wondering, is this Patricia? Did she log in through Twasima? But thanks, Council, for clarifying on that. So I am a police officer on a tour of duty with the Uganda Communication Commission in cybercrime and chief security, work with the SAT, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team. I have to say I'm passionate about the discussion. I've been thrilled by the discussion about the unconsensual, or what you are talking about, whereby someone actually goes ahead to share these photos. It's so sad that many times on the law enforcement side, you have not looked at actually the spread vector or who was responsible. Many a times, of course, this comes out as information, And I want to speak from the side that many of the content that we are looking at is running on social media. Way back in the traditional time, we were not battling with online sexual gender-based violence because the adaptability of communication was that you are using a one-to-one or you are using a GSM. You just make a voice call, then we go to the issue of data, where you have to then maybe communicate to one person on an email. But now here we are communicating on social media, which now enables you to reach people in the shortest time possible. So technology, like Dr. Harris said, has played a very critical role in enabling this type of violence. Just on November 11th, we had the International Day of the Girl Child. And these are things, again, that were brought out. How can we empower the women? How can we empower the girls? But now we are speaking of the harassment that is happening online. And I want to also talk about something that is so critical, the issue of technology playing a critical role. From the law enforcement perspective, when I was looking at the definition that we talked about on cyber stalking, just from the Computer Misuse Act, it actually says repetitive. There must be repetitive, there must be willfully. Someone should have done this either willfully, should have done it in a way as to harass the other person. And the law says any person. Now, for us, from the digital forensics perspective, we do not look at people, we look at accounts. And our biggest battle is to how do you then link the account to the person? And this is where there's always the thin line that you have to adduce some of this evidence professionally and correctly before the courts of law, because the courts of law are saying a person, but from the IT perspective, we have what we call avatars. And these are simply virtual accounts. Many of us are using virtual private networks, VPNs. So you may not sit on the main network, but how do you then, from the scientific point of view, unmask this information and adduce it sufficiently in courts of law without making it very complicated? So one of the challenges and one of the things we are dealing with is how to advise investigators, how to guide them on how to actually go deeper and investigate such crimes. There is the issue, if the report that was done by NITA, and it's called the IT governance report. The IT governance report noted that 18% of you internet users, in internet users, we are talking of about 22 million or 24 million internet users in Uganda. And now this has gone higher because we are 40 million. Now the last research is talking about 30 million. Because of COVID-19, everybody has actually moved on to online spaces for communication. Even those who are a bit resistant in using such technologies now are saying we have no choice, but we have to get there. We got hooked out on very, very many accounts. Now this means that the avalanche of internet risk that is therein. I was looking at a report by the FBI talking of the challenge right now law enforcement is having with dealing with fake accounts. So we may talk of the someone could create a Facebook account in my names or create a Facebook account in maybe in Sandra's names or in Patricia's names, and then we'll start pushing out content. And so you are there asking yourself, is it Patricia who's pushing it out? Is it Jimmy pushing it out? Or is another person pushing out this content? And so that's where we always have to go back and dissect and understand this. But from the public court of view, it will be the person that is tied to the images. And so many times that is the challenge. We have now the law called the GDPR. I hope I'm not very fast. The General Data Protection Regulations for European Union, which have not yet been domesticated in many of the African countries. But they have what we call the right to be forgotten or the right of erasure. I remember Council Patricia talking of this content is out there, but can it be pulled down? Now, if you have a signatory to the European Union where we are not, then there are processes that you can go through to have this erased. What about for us to sit in Uganda? We have not yet even signed the Budapest Convention, which is the UN Convention on Fighting of Cybercrime. So how will you escalate? How will you use support like letters of mutual legal assistance? And then we also have the standards on social media. Social media uses Facebook standards, which are the community standards, Twitter's policies and procedures. They are global, whereas you may be able to report something. You may look at it as actually it's a harassment. If someone put out your photo and put a funny cap of it or spoke something, it could be harassment. But what does the global standard? So we also have to put this discussion in the global perspective, because policing or regulating such online spaces is beyond the jurisdictions of your own country, because now it's borderless. The crime is borderless. The harassment could be coming from one country X harassing a person in country B, and the people actually reacting in country Z. So then the question is, where is the scene of crime if you're going to dissect this scene? So it's quite a challenge, and that's why we've been pushing for things like supportive science, supportive forensic science research in things like cloud technologies. How then can we, such conferences like this could maybe focusing more on empowerment. A report by Association of Certified Fraud Examiners of 2020, they released a report called the Report to the Nations, says that actually 65% of fraud was, as much as you're going to tie the knot on the law, but you're speaking to someone who is on the online space, you're also saying the online space should be used actually for marketing purposes. We have Instagram that is for photos, but there's another software called Photoshopping that is using maybe CS in design. So how do you then unpack that actually this is not the true person? I had a matter times when people are maybe called to the police, the public would report that actually you're going to be arrested, but many times you're being quelled to understand, do you know how did these photos end up there? What could have happened? But of course, many times people are traumatized, so they need special people under CID officers, like Patricia said, desks created, SGBV, sexual gender-based violence. And most of them now are manned by men, so that they can listen to you. But of course, it's not enough. They are now dealing with online crime. They may be dealing with challenges that are beyond their own control and jurisdiction. The other aspect I wanted also to speak about is a change of mindset, because the paper that Patricia presented is quite fascinating and interesting, but that means it needs a whole change of the entire business process of how we look at things, because the law speaks to whom have you found. If an incident occurred and there was a robbery somewhere, or let's look at an issue of mob justice, or what you call mob violence, and then the last person who's found there is picked by the police, probably they'll say you are the one who did it because you were the last there. But it's not always the fact. You may have just been passing by, and as they hit the last stone on this man, he actually died, and then the blood splashed on your shirt, and the DNA matches the blood that is on the victim, I mean on the deceased. So how do you pull yourself off that? So it's a lot of change of mindset, that, like someone says, the special court. We now have a special court for utilities, standards and wildlife at Uganda Road. But probably, is it enough? Is that special court at Uganda Road addressing this? Do we need a special court for this? Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development is looking into these things. What have they done? And other people are advocating. At one point, they required that matters of defilement, matters that are capital that affect the privacy of the person, they should be heard in camera. At one point, that discussion was going on that actually you can evidence, and in the judicial, you can adduce evidence remotely without necessarily being there. You can be cross-examined without necessarily being there, but on camera. But how is this being practiced? And with the other side of the defense be comfortable with that? And then finally, I wanted not to take a lot of time. We want to look at issues like many times the victims don't even know that their photos have been pushed out there. But because they have run, their faces are on them. Some of them may not have necessarily shared them. Many of them that have spoken to tell you, yes, we had this moment and I took these photos and I shared them with this friend of mine. But at the end of the day, you know, human being always has that interest and affinity to go wrong. So we always want to encourage more of the awareness that please maintain the digital hygiene, because you're dealing with a space that is literally not properly regulated, because even if Facebook was speaking to a country, if Uganda spoke to Facebook, put this content down, they may not put it down because they say it does not violate the community standards, which are global. So the same issue with the photos that have gone out, they may not violate, but then you can also report. There is a mechanism you can report these instances on social media. But how far? What about with Twitter that allows what we call parody accounts? Someone can have an account that is literally similar to yours, and that's accepted in their policies and standard. But to us, that is more else like you're personating or you're putting up an account. So there is an escalation mechanism that can be sent out to have the content put down if it breaches the community standards, not necessarily the Ugandan laws. So this is where I wanted us to change the mindset from that actually we are dealing with international related laws that govern online spaces. So just police alone cannot deal with this alone. Probably as we change our laws internally, then what about identity? People hide their identities many times. People don't communicate with their true identities. And I just hope even in this conference, if your name is there and that's the real you, but you are free to actually enter a name of your choice and you remain anonymous because again, you want to remain anonymous in nature. So I wanted the discussion to go into those challenges that stick around there. And at the end of the day, for me, awareness and advocacy for awareness is the best because at the end of the day, the institution has its own challenges. You have to do sufficient evidence. You have to prove this beyond reasonable doubt. But many of the perpetrators may not be even in the country that you can compel them. And in the other country where you want to compel them, actually, it's okay and it's acceptable to them. Yeah, so Sandra, I don't want to take much time. I'll be glad to pick up some questions as they come. But from my side, that's what I can put out for now. Thank you so much. Sandra, we can't hear you. I don't know if I'm the only one.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you so much. So I was saying that thank you so much for sharing your very great ideas on what the police is doing. I see that there's still a lot to do with consent in the digital space of how women or even men's pictures are being shared online, but they do not know that these pictures are being shared. And also you shared quite a number of practical scenarios of what is happening in the cyberspace. But Jimmy, maybe before we can take a question from Titi, I would like to just know that, to know from you, how do victims report online gender-based violence? What are some of the mechanisms the police has put in place to report these? What are some of the awareness mechanisms that police is doing to mitigate online gender-based violence in Uganda? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Without speaking the previously, before we went into the lockdown or before the COVID-19, there were approaches by the Commissariat Directorate that is to do with community policing, reaching out. Just last week, there was another presentation done by the head of Women Affairs and Children Protection at a conference by the Unwanted Witness. So there have been those frontiers by people moving out there to try and sensitize people on what actually this gender-based violence is all about. Of course, we've also talked of the deliberate creation of gender-based violence desks at the stations by CID and one at Kibuli that specifically looks at these issues that touch on matters that are actually private, because many times that these are private matters that have ended up now going into the public domain, and for one reason or the other, someone doesn't feel comfortable. But also, there have been other efforts to partner with the Ministry of Gender, and there have been efforts to work with the desk that deals with children affairs, because also we have children that are now accessing the internet, and these are girls. So it's cut across. We have also young boys who have been solicited into exposing their body parts for trade and so on and sell. So there's been that partnership. But for a fact to say, in terms of reporting, toll-free lines have been created, the call center, people make through those calls. The question is probably how reactive and how responsive. I think that has not been so good. And then also don't forget that also the Uganda Communication Commission has got the SAT, which is the Computer Emergency Response Team, that also receives these complaints through their complaint handling process, through calls. They have a toll-free line that can be called. They have an email that can be sent through. If you search it online, you can see it. The question at the back of the day, if someone reports, then are they willing to actually go ahead and provide you with a statement, or they're just providing you a tip? Many times it's just a whistleblower. Sometime back I was called, and there was a particular cafe in a location where every morning children are going and they're just watching pornography because our children are at home and they're watching nude photos of other African women back and forth. And so working together with the Pornography Control Committee, we're able to move in and apprehend such people who are misusing the space. The last I could also talk about is actually through their platform, through the police, through their Twitter, through their Facebook, have been trying to push out incidences that have actually been dealt with, cases that have been reported. We had a scenario of one brothel that was broken into by the police, where actually young children, young girls who had been solicited for a particular act. It's unfortunate. The young girls, some of them have been arrested and so on and so forth. And then the owner of who procured them. Now that Patricia would again unpack this for you in terms of procuring the offense and actually in the commission of the offense. But at the end of the day, we need to understand that it's still a big task, that enforcement alone cannot do it on their own. It actually calls for a lot of effort from different players to be able to understand that we are dealing with a big challenge. And as the fact that we are now in COVID-19, where now everybody's online, we are being told now there's an increase in commission of such crimes, because now crimes have moved from the traditional now to the online spaces. People are hacking into systems, people are looking for how they can ransomware people. And so they are creating fake IDs, creating fake stories. And so we are going to see an avalanche, an increase even in such violence online, because even our children are now studying online. But are they safe enough? Do they understand how to keep themselves safe online? Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. You highlighted something that you asked Patricia to highlight. Patricia, would you like to comment on that before we take on the next question?
Can I ask Jimmy to just repeat that for me, please?
Yeah, I was just talking of the issue of procuring. If you talk of procuring a particular crime, because we're talking of a scenario where these young girls were actually found in a brothel. These are teenagers, and they had been procured by one of the managers, but they have themselves been actually apprehended and arrested. And then people who were also consuming what had been procured. So we're looking, I wanted just to unpack for them the issue of procuring crime and who are the different actors and players.
Right, that's true. Just to start off by saying that unfortunately, in our situation, the people who procure and then the victims are oftentimes conflated, right? So you find that, and this has been the case with the Pornography Control Committee, that what happens then is that the victim, the perpetrator, the procurer, the watcher, everybody is punished, right? So the law, and this is why, you know, using the law alone is limiting, because the law oftentimes lacks that nuance that's needed in those scenarios. Now, in many cases, specifically around sexual violence as it manifests in different forms, but targeting young children, yeah, and by young children we mean people who cannot legally consent. What happens is that you have this individual or company in certain situations who then coerces, and I use the word coerce very liberally, right? Because these are children who don't have the capacity to really actually consent to what's happening to them, who then coerces through blackmail, through even just like having the kids having no opportunity to say no, right? Who then coerces these kids into some sort of sexual activity that they are in many cases financially benefiting from, these procurers, right? But that is also serving a group of people who are watching, who are engaging, who are even fully aware of the limitations within the law, the limitations within like our institutions like police, but also the limitations within our advocacy spaces. Because then the challenge is, how do you, these girls who have gone through this major trauma, how do you then ensure that the cycle is broken, right? Like how are we protecting them further? How are we engaging with them to ensure that they live past this, and all those other things that we need to ensure to do, like I said, to ensure that the cycle of violence is just not replicating itself and manifesting in different ways. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Sandra, I think just I come in there, I agree with her. That's why you see when you talk of the unconsensual or intimate partner violence, many times at the law enforcement front end, you're just looking at these images that have been distributed, and by morality and modacity, they do not meet the standard. And so you're looking at whose photos are these, and then how did they get out into that space? And as you investigate, you realize that actually the person shared them with just their partner. But you have to now go ahead to prove that and actually look at their mobile phone. Did you actually share them with this partner only, or you could have shared them? Sometimes you own a Facebook page, and it could be triggered with malware that when you join a particular group, everything on your private wall becomes public. And so it goes spreading out there. So it may not even be your partner, but it could be a trigger. It could be a trigger by a particular virus or by, so at the end of the day, you cannot just say, no, sorry about this. You have to start by saying, how did this happen? Whose photos are these? And so the enforcement team may not have that training to go back and actually do the counseling. And many times you probably want to say, could we have a counselor in between? But at the end of the day, I also keep asking that, why would you then share private? Because you're sharing them on a platform that actually is over the internet. Because now our mobile phones, if you bet many times, our mobile phones are available online. Even when you sign out your email, still your email is open on your phone. When you sign out on your Facebook, on your laptop, on your pad, it's still open on your mobile phone. So, and then you may give your child maybe to be with this phone, and he or she innocently clicks this button and the photos go viral. So we will go in for the child, we will go in for you. So it's a lot of discussion, and I like it that if we go further and then try to understand at the end of the day, by the time you choose to share, whom have you shared them with? And then they'll share them with another person, and the third person, probably at the fourth party, is when they now go out. So it's the work of enforcement now to dig and investigate, but they have to start with where were the photos taken from. And so we start from the photos were in the camera of this victim, and then we start to trace them back. But by the time you do that investigation, sometimes people, for privacy and all this, they say, I just don't want to continue with this case, just end it here, it's over. And so you need to seek guidance from state, from DPP, whether to drop these charges, whether to actually continue pursuing the people who may have done it, as you get a statement. But even getting a statement from the victim, to them, they feel already they're traumatized. So how best do we help these people? Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. And Patricia, for your response. I would just go quickly to read the questions that has been directed to Jimmy, then you can answer them at once. So Titi is saying, thank you, Jimmy, for sharing. What innovative approach has Uganda Communication Commission adopted to ensure justice for vulnerable women and girls in Uganda? And then the next question is from Lily. Lily is asking, Jimmy, do we have trained personnel in Uganda Police who can handle cases of gender-based violence online without inflicting pain to the victims or the survivors? And then the last question from David is asking, thank you for the great discussion, Aguma. Do you just like me have an issue with the alleged act of harassment by a perpetrator being repressive before a victim can obtain justice from law enforcers? Does it before a perpetrator can be brought to book? Over to you.
question may need to be broken and unpacked for me to clearly understand, but I can feel the emotion with which it comes. So the issue of innovation, what has the Commission done in terms of innovation? If you visit the UCC blog, I think they have been trying to send out content on safety. We've been running the *197# USSD code. This is speaking specifically to identity and establishing that you know the numbers that are under your name, because also many times people will send out content and then will say, for more, call this number. And actually they will put your number. You're just in your home and someone has put your number and people will be calling you. And the enforcement team will also pick up that number and say, hey, why did you put this number? But you don't know about this. So it's a very, very, very uneven ground, very, very slippery ground, investigating online crime because of the things that go out there. Someone puts out an image, a number. For more of this content, please call this number, reach me on this. You have no idea about this. So the issue of, we've been trying to push out more of the awareness content, more of the awareness drive. Of course, would have preferred to have even what we call, they normally call them the Commission Conference on Consumer Awareness, because the consumers actually consuming this content online. They are paying for it. They are paying to access the internet because they are paying over the top taxes and so on and so forth. But now we've said that let's use the approach, social media and Twitter. On the side of the Uganda police, they have developed an app which is majorly for reporting instances, but not specifically speaking to sexual, gender-based violence. And maybe this is an area that may require reporting. It may require even to report in anonymity, more like whistleblowing, because many times even the one who's reporting does not want to be known. They just want to tell you, my husband has done this to me, he has messed me up, please find him. These are the photos. And so they don't want to be called at the station because they already feel ashamed, they already feel embarrassed. And so how do we reach out to them? Because the law, again, as Council Patricia will tell you, requires that for you to actually go ahead and constitute any formal investigation, there must be formal proceeding, there must be a statement on record, a formal complaint on file by the person. And many a times, statement recording, people just feel traumatized. Being called to record a statement says, I've already sent you the images that were sent out there. Don't call me for a statement. So this in itself also affects the way investigation is being done. Does the police have trained personnel to deal with sexual gender-based violence online? I have to say that there are few, because we have teams that have been given skills in sexual gender-based violence investigation per se, but also we have teams that deal with cybercrime that is online. But now marrying the two skill sets is very critical. That's what I would say, because as you investigate this, as you navigate this, you're very conscious of issues to do with the Data Protection and Privacy Act. You're conscious that as the information is going out, you have to investigate this with due privacy, and then other players that come in, there are escalation approaches that we normally have to send to, say, Facebook. There's a Facebook page for law enforcement. There's a Facebook page for regulator. You also can report an incident as the victim to Facebook and escalate it to them. But all this, you see, requires now marrying the two skills of sexual gender-based violence and online. I have to speak for a fact, there are not many. I've received that training back and forth, but there are not many. And the crimes are happening sporadically every single day, every single minute. I was looking at the report that 30% of women online have been either abused or have experienced, but this could even be low. Now we are speaking, what about children who are now also online? The third question, I beg that you unpack it for me, please. Whoever posed the question, I would be glad. I didn't clearly get it well. Kindly unpack it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. You could just use the chat and you respond to David. Thank you so much. We are almost coming to the end of our discussion, but I would like to just give a round of closing remarks to our speakers. I would like to start with Patricia, then we'll go to Dr. Aris and Jimmy, and then, yeah, like that. Thank you so much.
So closing remarks. closing remarks is that the work ahead is very difficult because we must understand violence against women and girls, and just violence in general, as a systemic issue, as an issue that is deeply embedded in our institutions, in our cultures, in our systems, which is why it makes it that much harder to fully begin to unpack it, because all of it is so interconnected. And that's thinking through laws, in thinking through police and other judicial systems and etc., we must always come to that consciousness that these are institutions and these are systems and individuals who have all been conditioned to sort of normalize, especially with digital violence, right? Because when we don't see the actual physical pain, we trivialize it. And that's why violence against women as manifests on digital spaces is going to be extremely harder to deal with in our context, in Uganda's case, right? Because we just don't take it. Everyone has a role to play. The media has a huge role to play. They must shift the way they report and talk about these stories. The court systems have a role to play, police have a role to play, but we too have a role to play, because how many of you, I can say that, but how many of you can say that when someone's nude images are leaked online, you're not as excited to see them or share them, right? All those contribute to harming women and to harming victims. And so, yes, I would implore you to all be feminists in your actions and ensure that this violence is curbed once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. If we had time, I would ask you to unpack for us more about feminism, but we don't have. We can keep it for another time. We can also now, I would like to invite Dr. Bridget Harris to give closing remarks. Over to you, Doctor.
I mean, I think that was a lot of the things I would like to say. We can't address online violence on its own. It reflects the inequalities that we have offline. So we need to look at, yes, addressing violence as a whole. Technology can absolutely be a weapon, but I think we can harness it. So we can harness it to have, different campaigns to challenge ideas about violence, to advocate for gender inequality. And we can use we can use technology to really empower. So it's a channel that we can use. And I think advocates are doing really exciting things in this space. So one of the important things is to really share knowledge and strategies. And that's why I think forums like this are so great. And I would love to hear the work that people are doing. So please do email me. I'd love to hear what you're doing.
Hello, have we lost Dr. Bridget? It seems I have lost her.
Hi, sorry. We've got I was done, but we have storms where I am, so it's very loud. Yeah, I don't think I've got really anything to add, but I just think that we can harness technology to try and push for change, but we have to work. It's not just about addressing the online, we have to address what is happening offline, and that means really pushing for gender inequality. And I guess just one more thing while I think of it is that also means changing the tech industry. It means that we are providing more women and girls with skills to use technology. We're pushing for change with platforms, because platforms are really an issue too that we can address. I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bridget Harris. We will have Jimmy to be the last person to make the closing remark. Jimmy, I would like to request you to use all the 2 minutes to make the closing remarks.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you, the different participants. It was a pleasure having all of you here. For David, I agree with you. The law sticks to being repetitive. and the offense must be repetitive. That's the law. So many times if you're just harassed once, it's not yet an offense because the law says it has to be repetitive. And that's what we deal with. I would only just close in by saying actually that if we can practice what we call digital hygiene or digital safety, then we can avert some of these imminent threats, because it's for a fact that when you're online, you're actually, there's a threat, and that's why companies now are going in for cyber insurance or risk at the end of the day. And then the other issue is that really share what really you're comfortable with going out in the public, because when you're sharing with a friend, you're actually not simply sharing with them, you're sharing through a network. Between you and your friend, there is another person who is called the data subject owner or the custodian of data, this space, the cloud space. So they could leak, this information could leak. So if you have to share them, let it be strictly what you're comfortable with leaking at the end of the day. And then the other big issue I would call for is that if we harness the effort of actually domesticating the international conventions like the Budapest Convention, then it will also help us to escalate some of these threats. But then also the other question that remains outlines that the GDPR is strictly for the Europe, so people in the European countries. So what is Africa doing in terms of addressing these cyber threats? Because most of the things we are receiving, the things that we are using are from the Western world. And many times when issues come back, we have to run to them to actually help us. But can we look at domesticating some profiles within our own online spaces? Thank you so much for the rest, and please stay safe, and always let's observe the SOPs about COVID-19. Regards.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for the advice and for your elaborate response and closing remarks. We have come to the end of our conference. I would like to thank all the panelists, Jimmy Aguma, Twasime Patricia, and Dr. Bridget Harris for accepting our invite to come and share their experience on online gender-based violence and what is being done to address or mitigate online gender-based violence. And also, I would like to really thank Association for Progressive Communication, APC, and Take Back the Tech for supporting us to make this conference happen. And also, I would also encourage you that this discussion does not stop here. Please follow us on Twitter at WUGNET, and then you can follow us also on Facebook, Women of Uganda Network, and then we are also on Instagram at WUGNET1 to get more insights. We have been running several campaigns around online gender-based violence, like non-consensual intimate images that is commonly known as that is normally known as revenge porn. And you share your insights, share your views, share it to the next page. You might never know that who is suffering in the online space and regarded to gender-based violence. Thank you so much. We have come to the end of our session, and thank you for joining us today.